The opulent ballroom glittered with golden chandeliers and a sea of champagne flutes, each carried by impeccably dressed servers. High above the clinking glasses and polite laughter, the conversation at one particular table grew sharper. Elon Musk, seated at the center, was surrounded by a group of wealthy elites whose opinions were as inflated as their egos. So, Elon drawled a balding man in a tailored navy suit. His name was Edward Grantham, a hedge fund titan notorious for his arrogance. You've conquered electric cars, rockets, and now AI. But tell me, what about something truly impossible? Elon raised an eyebrow, a faint smirk playing on his lips. Impossible? Such as? Edward gestured lazily toward the edge of the room where a waitress in a plain black uniform shuffled between tables. Clara. She was an overweight woman in her late 30s, her shoulders slouched under the weight of invisible burdens. The spark in her eyes seemed long extinguished. Her, Edward said with a cruel chuckle. Change her life. Make her into, well, something worth noticing. The table erupted into laughter, but Elon remained silent, studying Clara as she balanced a tray of appetizers. Her movements were slow but deliberate, her face expressionless. Edward leaned closer, his tone dripping with condescension. I'll sweeten the deal. I'll fund whatever ridiculous endeavor you concoct. Just prove me wrong. Prove that someone like her, he waved dismissively, can become extraordinary. Elon straightened his jacket, his smirk hardening into a determined line. I don't need your money, Edward, he said, his voice calm yet cutting. But I'll take your challenge. Not because I agree with you, but to prove that nobody is impossible to change. He stood abruptly, the motion silencing the table. As he approached Clara, the murmur of the party dimmed. Her back was to him as she placed a flute of champagne on a guest's table. When she turned and saw him standing there, her brow furrowed in confusion. Can I help you, sir? She asked cautiously, her voice low. Elon met her gaze, his expression unreadable. Yes, he said simply. What if I told you I wanted to help you change your life? Clara blinked, her discomfort palpable. Her hands clutched the edges of her tray like a lifeline. Around them, the other staff members paused, their eyes darting between the billionaire and the server. Excuse me, she replied, her tone sharp with disbelief. You heard me, Elon said, unflinching. I believe in impossible things, Clara, and I think you can do something extraordinary. Her cheeks flushed, her posture stiffening as the weight of every humiliation she'd endured seemed to resurface. She looked at him as if he were mocking her, her voice shaking with restrained anger. Why would someone like you care about someone like me? She asked, bitterness and pain threading through her words. Because, Elon said, his tone earnest now, you're more than you think. And I want to prove it. To them, to myself, but most importantly, to you. The room seemed to hold its breath as Clara stared at him, her face a storm of emotions. Finally, with a nervous glance at her manager, she stammered, I need to get back to work. Think about it, Elon said softly, stepping back and letting her pass. As she moved away, she cast one last uncertain glance over her shoulder. Behind him, Edward smirked, raising his glass in mockery. Elon didn't bother turning around. Instead, he looked at Clara one last time, determination gleaming in his eyes. This wasn't about proving Edward wrong. It was about showing Clara and the world that no one was truly beyond change. The night was winding down, but Clara's mind raced as she scrubbed a stubborn stain off a silver platter in the back kitchen. The sounds of laughter and clinking glasses still echoed from the ballroom, but all she could hear was Elon Musk's voice. What if I told you I wanted to help you change your life? She had thought about it every second since he said it, replaying the moment in disbelief. A billionaire, one of the most famous men in the world, offering to help her? It had to be some cruel joke. People like him didn't help people like her. They laughed at them, used them as pawns in their games. Clara, you're zoning out again, snapped her manager, a wiry man named Dave. His tone was as sharp as his thinning hairline. "Go grab the glasses from the East Wing before you clock out." "Sorry, Mr. Lewis," she muttered, quickly setting the platter aside. Her hands trembled slightly as she grabbed a fresh tray and pushed through the swinging doors. In the dimly lit hallway, she nearly collided with Elon, who was leaning casually against the wall, his expression composed but watchful. Startled, she froze, clutching the tray tightly to her chest. "Clara," he said, straightening up. Her name on his lips made her stomach churn. "Mr. Musk," she replied, her tone cautious. "Is there something you need? More champagne? A sandwich?" "No," he said, smiling faintly at her attempt at humor. "I need a moment of your time." Clara hesitated, her pulse quickening. "Look, if this is some kind of joke—" "It's not," Elon interrupted, his voice firm but not unkind. "I'm serious. I want to help you. Not for money, not for fame. Just to prove that anyone, given the right tools, can achieve extraordinary things." Her grip on the tray tightened. She laughed bitterly, a short, hollow sound. "Why me? Out of everyone here tonight. Hell, everyone in this city. Why me?" "Because you're the one they said couldn't," he replied simply. Clara's heart sank at the memory of the snickering guests, their cruel eyes boring into her as Edward pointed her out. "And you're doing this for them? To prove them wrong?" Elon shook his head. "I'm doing this for you. But yes, I want to prove them wrong too. People like Edward think they know everything, that their world is set in stone. I want to show them, and you, that nothing is." Her eyes filled with tears before she could stop them. She looked down, her voice cracking. "Why should I trust you? People like you don't care about people like me. We're just a joke to you." "Then don't trust me," Elon said simply. "Trust yourself. What do you have to lose?" His words struck a chord, but Clara felt her walls rise again. "If you're lying, if this is some stunt to make yourself look good," she wiped her cheek angrily. "I swear I'll." "You have my word," Elon interrupted gently. "No cameras, no reporters, just you and me figuring out what's possible." She studied him through red-rimmed eyes, searching for any trace of condescension or pity. All she saw was sincerity. That scared her more than anything. Clara swallowed hard and squared her shoulders. "Fine, but if you're lying, I'll walk away. And I won't look back." Elon extended a hand, his gaze steady. "Deal." After a long pause, Clara shook it, her grip hesitant but firm. "Deal," she whispered. As he walked away, leaving her standing alone in the hallway, Clara felt a strange flicker of something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. But it was buried beneath layers of fear, doubt, and a lingering voice in her head that said, "Don't let him hurt you." The next morning, Clara woke up feeling like the previous night had been a strange dream. But the business card on her nightstand, clean, white, and emblazoned with Elon Musk's name, was very real. Along with it was a handwritten note. "Meet me at this address at 10 a.m. sharp. Bring nothing but yourself. Let's start proving everyone wrong." Her first instinct was to toss the card in the trash. The last thing she wanted was to become some billionaire's charity case or pet project. Yet, an uneasy curiosity stirred in her. She glanced at the clock, 8:30 a.m. By 9:45, Clara was standing outside the glass-fronted building Elon had directed her to, a massive and modern complex that gleamed in the morning sunlight. She dressed as plainly as possible, jeans, sneakers, and an oversized sweatshirt. Her stomach churned with a mix of apprehension and defiance. Inside, Elon greeted her with his usual calm energy. He was dressed casually, his hands in his pockets, as he stood beside a group of professionals who introduced themselves with warm smiles. A nutritionist named Dr. Harper Monroe, a personal trainer named Ethan Cole, and a psychologist, Dr. Vivian Torres. "This is your team," Elon said, gesturing toward them. "They're here to guide you, step by step. Whatever you need, they'll provide." Clara blinked at the group, her voice laced with suspicion. "All of this for me?" Ethan stepped forward first, his grin disarming. "We're not here to judge you, Clara. We're here to help you figure out what you want and how to get there." Dr. Torres nodded. This isn't about perfection. It's about discovering what you're capable of physically, emotionally, and mentally. Dr. Monroe chimed in, her tone warm. Think of us as your cheerleaders. We'll celebrate every victory, no matter how small. Clara crossed her arms. And if I fail? You won't fail, Elon said firmly. But even if you stumble, we'll help you get back up. She didn't reply, her silence speaking volumes. The first day was overwhelming. Dr. Monroe ran blood tests and created a tailored nutrition plan while Ethan introduced her to a series of light exercises to gauge her physical condition. Clara felt painfully self-conscious as he guided her through squats and stretches in a private gym. At one point, she stopped mid-exercise, her cheeks flushed, not from exertion, but from frustration. I can't do this, she snapped, her voice shaking. I'm too far gone. Ethan crouched beside her, his tone gentle but unwavering. That's the old you talking, the one who believed those lies for too long. But I see someone stronger than she thinks. Clara's eyes stung with tears, but she pushed through the rest of the session. By the time she collapsed onto a bench, she felt equal parts exhausted and strangely proud. Later, in a quiet moment, she confronted Elon. Why are you even here? She asked, her voice raw. Don't you have, I don't know, rockets to build? Elon smiled faintly. I've built rockets. This is harder. She rolled her eyes. Gee, thanks. I'm serious, he said. Machines are predictable. People aren't. But you're worth the effort. For the first time, Clara saw a flicker of vulnerability in him. It disarmed her more than any of his grand gestures. As the days turned into weeks, Clara faced hurdles she hadn't anticipated. Simple dietary changes felt monumental. Exercises that seemed easy for others pushed her to her limits. The world didn't magically grow kinder either. Whispers and judgmental glances followed her everywhere. One day, during an intense training session, Clara hit a breaking point. She dropped the weights with a loud clang and stormed out of the gym, tears streaming down her face. Outside, leaning against a wall, she whispered to herself, I'll never be enough. Why even try? Elon found her minutes later. He didn't say anything at first, just stood beside her, hands in his pockets. Finally, he broke the silence. You're right, he said, his tone even. Clara whipped her head toward him, her face twisting in anger. Excuse me. You'll never be enough for them, Elon continued, his voice calm. Because their opinion doesn't matter, but you can be enough for yourself. That's what this is about. His words hit her like a punch to the gut. She sniffed, wiping her tears. What if I don't believe that? Then, keep going until you do, he said simply. You've already done more than you thought you could. Imagine what else you're capable of. Clara didn't reply, but something in her shifted. For the first time, she began to think that maybe, just maybe, Elon was right. The weeks rolled on, and Clara found herself waking up each morning with a mix of exhaustion and determination. The workouts were grueling, the nutrition plan tested her patience, and the therapy sessions dredged up memories she'd spent years burying. But with every passing day, she felt herself growing a little stronger, not just physically, but in ways she hadn't anticipated. During one of her therapy sessions with Dr. Vivian Torres, the conversation took an unexpected turn. Clara had been describing her frustration with the stares and whispers she encountered every time she entered the gym. It's like they can't believe I even belong there, she said, her hands wringing nervously. Like I'm some kind of joke. Dr. Torres leaned forward, her tone soft but probing. Why do you think their opinions matter so much to you? Clara hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor. Because it feels like they're right. I've been a joke my whole life. It's not like this is new. Tell me about that, Dr. Torres encouraged gently. Where do you think that belief started? For a long moment, Clara said nothing. Then, almost as if the words were being pulled out of her, she began to speak. I used to sing, she said quietly. A long time ago. I loved it. I was good at it. Dr. Torres didn't interrupt, letting the silence stretch until Clara continued. I even had dreams of going professional. I'd perform at little coffee shops, local fairs. people said I had a real chance. But then, her voice faltered, her hands clenching into fists. Then I met him. Who was he? Dr. Torres asked. Brian, Clara said, spitting the name like a curse. He was charming at first, supportive even, told me I had a beautiful voice, made me believe I could make it big. Her expression darkened as the memories flooded back. But then, when things got serious, he changed. He'd pick apart everything I did. My weight, my voice, my clothes. He'd say, "You'll never make it looking like that. No one wants to see someone like you on stage." Her voice cracked, and she wiped at her eyes angrily. I believed him. I stopped singing, stopped dreaming. Dr. Torres' face remained calm, but her voice was thick with empathy. That must have been incredibly painful, Clara. It was, Clara admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. But what's worse is he made me believe I deserved it, that he was the only person who'd ever loved me. What happened to him? Dr. Torres asked. I finally left, Clara said, a hint of defiance creeping into her tone. After 2 years of his crap, I walked out. But by then, I'd lost everything. My confidence, my dreams, my voice. I started working jobs like this to get by. And, well, here I am. The session ended on a somber note, but Dr. Torres encouraged Clara to keep exploring these feelings. That evening, Clara found herself in the quiet of the training facility, sitting alone at the piano tucked in the corner of the room. Her fingers hovered over the keys, trembling. Slowly, hesitantly, she began to play. The sound was shaky at first, the notes uneven. But as she played, the muscle memory returned. And then, without thinking, she began to hum. The hum turned into a melody, soft and broken, but unmistakably hers. She didn't notice Elon standing in the doorway until he spoke. "You've got a gift," he said, his voice startling her. Clara jumped, her hands flying off the keys. I was just messing around," she stammered, her cheeks burning. "Don't stop," Elon said, stepping into the room. "You sounded amazing." Clara shook her head, her eyes fixed on the piano. "I don't sing anymore. It's not who I am. Maybe it's who you were," Elon said, sitting down beside her. "But it doesn't mean it's gone. What if this whole process isn't about becoming someone new? What if it's about finding the person you've always been?" Clara didn't respond, but her fingers drifted back to the keys. This time, when she played, her voice joined in, a quiet, tentative melody that filled the room. For the first time in years, she felt a small flicker of the joy she used to know. Elon sat silently, listening, a thoughtful expression on his face. As the last note faded, Clara looked at him, a trace of vulnerability in her eyes. "I used to think I was a star," she said softly, "but he made me feel like nothing." Elon met her gaze. "You were a star, Clara. You still are. You just forgot how to shine." The progress Clara made in her transformation didn't go unnoticed. For weeks, the sessions with her team and Elon's presence in her life were kept discreet, but eventually, rumors began to leak. It started small, whispers on social media about a mysterious woman Elon Musk was helping. But then the tabloids got wind of it, and overnight, Clara became a spectacle. Headlines screamed, "Elon Musk's human experiment, transforming a nobody into somebody." Clara woke up to her phone buzzing nonstop. Messages flooded in, some supportive, but most filled with ridicule and scorn. As she scrolled through the comments, her stomach churned. Who does she think she is? Just another rich guy playing God. This has to be a joke. She'll never change. Elon called her later that morning, his voice calm but firm. "Clara, don't read the comments. The media loves to spin things, but this isn't about them." She wanted to believe him, but the comments stuck in her head, their weight dragging her back into old insecurities. By the time Clara arrived at the training facility that afternoon, she was seething. The normally quiet building felt oppressive as she stormed into the gym, where Elon was waiting with Ethan and Dr. Monroe. "You said this wouldn't be a circus," she snapped, throwing her bag onto the floor. You promised no cameras, no reporters. And now I'm plastered all over the internet like some kind of freak show. Elon stood, his expression steady but concerned. Clara, I didn't invite this attention. Someone leaked it. Oh, right, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Because it's not like you're used to living in the spotlight or anything. Ethan stepped forward, his hands raised in a calming gesture. Clara, let's take a breath. No, she interrupted, her voice trembling with anger and pain. I trusted you, and now the whole world is laughing at me. I knew this was a mistake. I knew this was all for your stupid ego. Elon's jaw tightened, but his tone remained measured. This was never about ego, Clara. I care about your success, not what the tabloids say. Then why does it feel like I'm just another one of your projects? She shot back, tears welling in her eyes. You build rockets, you make cars, and now you're trying to rebuild me. What happens when you get bored? When I don't perform the way you want me to? The room fell silent. For a moment, Elon looked as though he might argue, but then he took a step closer, his voice softening. I didn't handle this the way I should have. You're right to be angry. I should have protected you from this. Clara's lips pressed into a thin line as she fought to keep her emotions in check. You think saying sorry makes it better? It doesn't. I'm done. Before anyone could stop her, Clara grabbed her bag and stormed out, the door slamming behind her. The next few days were a blur. Clara ignored calls from Elon and the team, retreating into her small apartment and avoiding the world. The headlines continued to spread, but now, so did the pitying messages. It was worse than the ridicule. Her apartment grew stifling, the silence heavy. She found herself staring at the piano in the corner, but the thought of playing made her feel hollow. Late one evening, she turned on the television, scrolling aimlessly until she landed on a news segment about Elon Musk. A panel of pundits was debating his intentions with Clara. He's clearly using her for publicity, one of them sneered. It's a vanity project, plain and simple. Another commentator countered, or maybe it's genuine. He's a complex guy. Visionary, sure, but unpredictable. Clara turned off the TV, her head spinning. A part of her wanted to call Elon and demand answers, but another part told her it didn't matter. She couldn't handle being reduced to a media story. Then, a knock came at her door. She hesitated before opening it to find Elon standing there, holding a box of her favorite tea, something he'd noticed during one of their sessions. His expression was uncharacteristically uncertain. May I come in? He asked. Clara folded her arms, glaring. Why are you here? To apologize, he said simply, and to tell you that I'm stepping back. His words caught her off guard. Stepping back. Elon nodded. If this is too much, if the attention is too hard to handle, I'll stop. I'll pull the team and let you live your life however you choose. Clara's anger flared again. Oh, so now I'm just free to fail. Great. Thanks for that. You wouldn't be failing, Elon said quietly. But I understand if you feel like this isn't worth it. I won't force you to keep going. The vulnerability in his voice disarmed her. For the first time, she saw the weight he carried, not just as a billionaire or a visionary, but as someone who had taken on a deeply personal challenge. Clara sighed, leaning against the doorframe. I don't know if I can do this, Elon. I don't know if I'm strong enough. You are, he said, his voice firm now. But I can't want it more than you do. His words lingered long after he left, the box of tea sitting unopened on her counter. Clara spent the night thinking, her mind racing with memories of her progress, her setbacks, and the strange, unexpected connection she'd built with Elon and the team. When morning came, she reached a decision. A week had passed since Clara walked away from Elon and the team. She tried to return to her old routines, but nothing felt the same. The whispers at work seemed louder, the weight of judgment heavier, and the days more monotonous. The drive that had fueled her before, the glimmer of hope that she could be more than what she'd always been, was now replaced by a dull ache of regret. It was a gray Saturday morning when a plain white envelope appeared in her mailbox. Clara nearly ignored it, assuming it was another bill or junk mail, but the bold, looping handwriting on the front stopped her. It read simply, "For Clara." Inside was a single card with an address and a time, Sunday at 4 p.m., and a brief note, "I know you're angry and I don't blame you. But if you're willing, I'd like to show you something. No cameras, no fanfare, just come as you are, Elon." Clara held the card in her hands for a long time, her heart torn. Every part of her screamed that she should toss it in the trash, but a small, stubborn voice inside whispered, "What if this isn't about him? What if this is about you?" The next day, Clara arrived at the address, a sprawling field on the outskirts of the city. She parked her car on the gravel road and stepped out, her sneakers crunching beneath her. A crowd had gathered, but it wasn't the paparazzi or high society types she'd feared. Instead, there were families with children, students, and everyday people holding signs with phrases like "Dream big" and "One step at a time." Ahead of them loomed a massive rocket, its sleek design towering against the cloudy sky. Clara's breath caught as she took in the sight. "Elon's about to speak," someone near her said, nudging her toward the stage set up at the edge of the field. She hesitated but moved closer, drawn by curiosity. Elon stood at the podium, looking more serious than she'd ever seen him. His voice carried over the crowd, steady and deliberate. "Every launch is a gamble," he began, gesturing toward the rocket. "It's a test of resilience, determination, and trust in what's possible. But rockets aren't the only things that need those qualities. People do too." His eyes scanned the crowd and stopped when they landed on Clara. For a moment, she wanted to run, but something in his gaze held her in place. "I've learned something these past few months," Elon continued. "Success isn't about how far we can go or what we can achieve. It's about the people who push us to believe in what seems impossible. This launch is dedicated to one of those people, a woman who taught me what true resilience looks like." The crowd turned to see who he was looking at, murmurs rippling through the air. Clara felt her cheeks burn as Elon stepped away from the podium and walked toward her, his movements slow and purposeful. "You," he said when he reached her, his voice quiet but filled with conviction. "You're stronger than any rocket I've ever built, Clara. And I wanted you to see that, not in headlines or comments, but right here, right now." Tears pricked her eyes, but she blinked them away, swallowing the lump in her throat. "Why would you do this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "After everything I said." "Because you matter," Elon replied simply. "And because I believe in you, even when you don't believe in yourself." For a moment, the world seemed to fade. The noise of the crowd, the looming rocket, even the sting of her own doubts. All of it disappeared. All that remained was a quiet sense of possibility. As the countdown for the launch began, Elon leaned in and said, "You don't have to decide anything today. But whatever you choose, know this. You're not impossible, Clara. You never were." The roar of the engines drowned out her reply, but the warmth in her chest told her that, for the first time, she might finally be ready to believe him. The weeks following the rocket launch felt like a new chapter for Clara. She didn't return to her old routines, nor did she rush back into Elon's meticulously planned program. Instead, she took the time to reflect. It wasn't an easy process. Doubts and fears still clung to her, but the memory of Elon's words and the way the crowd had cheered for her sparked something deeper. One evening, Clara found herself standing outside the gym Elon had reserved for her sessions. It was late, the building dark except for a single light in the corner where Ethan was training another client. She hesitated at the door, wondering if she should turn back, but Ethan spotted her and waved her in. "Thought you might show up," he said with a grin, wiping sweat from his brow. "You ready?" Clara shifted awkwardly. "I'm not sure, but I think I want to try again." "That's all I need to hear," Ethan replied. "Let's start slow." Returning wasn't easy. Clara had lost momentum during her time away, and the physical challenges felt as grueling as ever. During one particularly intense session, she collapsed onto a mat, gasping for breath. "I can't do this," she said, her voice shaking. "It's too hard." "You've said that before," Ethan reminded her, kneeling beside her. "And yet, here you are. What does that tell you?" Clara frowned, brushing a strand of hair from her sweaty face. That I'm stubborn. Ethan laughed. Exactly. And that stubbornness is going to carry you farther than you think. The small victories began to pile up. Clara started running short distances, her strides growing steadier with each attempt. Her sessions with Dr. Monroe transformed into conversations about nutrition that excited her rather than intimidated her. And in her quiet moments, she began playing the piano again, her voice slowly returning to the melodies she thought she'd lost. One day, Elon showed up unannounced during her training. Clara was midway through a grueling circuit, sweat dripping down her face as she pushed through the last set of burpees. When she finished, she looked up and saw him leaning against the wall, arms crossed, a faint smile on his face. "Not bad," he said. Clara rolled her eyes, grabbing a towel to wipe her face. "What are you doing here?" "I wanted to see how you were doing," Elon replied, "and to tell you that I'm proud of you." The words caught her off guard. "Proud of what?" "I'm still nowhere near where I want to be." "You're here," he said simply. "That's what matters." The sincerity in his voice struck a chord. Clara nodded, her lips curving into a small but genuine smile. "Thanks." As the weeks turned into months, Clara's transformation became undeniable. She had lost weight, but the changes went far beyond the physical. She carried herself differently, her shoulders straighter, her gaze more confident. She even started performing again, small gigs at local coffee shops where her voice, raw and powerful, captivated the audiences. At one performance, Elon sat in the back of the room, watching quietly as Clara sang a hauntingly beautiful rendition of an old jazz standard. When she finished, the room erupted into applause, and Clara spotted him through the crowd. For the first time, she felt no embarrassment or doubt, only pride. Afterward, he approached her, his expression thoughtful. "You've come a long way." "I had good help," Clara replied, a hint of playfulness in her tone. Elon smiled. "You're becoming someone who inspires others, Clara. That's more than I ever hoped for." His words stayed with her. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that she was more than just a project or a challenge. She was someone worth believing in, and that realization changed everything. The night of the charity gala was one Clara had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. Elon had suggested organizing a benefit concert to celebrate her progress and raise money for causes close to her heart. After much persuasion, she agreed, even offering to perform for the audience, a bold step that both thrilled and terrified her. The venue was stunning, a historic theater adorned with strings of golden lights and tables draped in elegant linens. Clara arrived early, wearing a sleek black gown Elon had insisted she choose for herself. Her nerves were frayed as she peeked out from behind the curtain, seeing the room fill with powerful and glamorous figures. "You ready for this?" Ethan asked, appearing beside her. "No," Clara admitted, gripping the edge of the curtain tightly. "But I'll do it anyway." "That's the spirit," Ethan said, grinning. "Knock 'em dead." As the night unfolded, Clara moved through the event in a haze of mingled fear and exhilaration. Guests stopped her to compliment her transformation, and while their words were kind, the undertone of disbelief in their voices stung. But the moment she dreaded most came when she spotted a figure from her past. Brian, her ex-boyfriend, stood near the bar, his smirk as cruel and cutting as she remembered. Clara froze, her heart pounding in her chest. "Didn't think you'd have the guts to show up in a place like this," Brian sneered as he sauntered over to her. His voice was low enough not to draw attention, but the venom in it was unmistakable. "What's the game here, Clara? Pretending you're someone you're not?" Clara's throat tightened. "I don't owe you anything," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Brian chuckled darkly. "Oh, you think you've changed? You can lose the weight, wear the fancy dress, but you'll always be the same pathetic woman who begged me to stay." The words hit her like a blow, dredging up every insecurity she thought she'd left behind. She stepped back, her mind spinning, but before she could respond, Elon appeared at her side. "Is there a problem here?" Elon asked, his tone sharp enough to cut steel. Brian's smirk faltered. "No problem. Just catching up with an old friend." Elon's gaze hardened. "Funny, because it looks like you're trying to tear her down. Let me make this clear. You don't have that power anymore." Brian laughed, though the sound was strained. "Relax, Musk. I'm just saying hello." "Good," Elon said, stepping closer. "Then you've said enough. Time for you to leave." Brian opened his mouth to argue, but the icy resolve in Elon's expression silenced him. With a dismissive shrug, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Clara let out a shaky breath, her hands trembling. "He's right," she whispered. "I'll never be good enough." Elon turned to her, his eyes fierce. "Don't you dare believe that. He's a coward who's threatened by your strength. That's why he's here, to drag you back down. But you're not that person anymore." Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away. "I don't know if I can do this." "You don't have to prove anything to him," Elon said. "But if you go out there tonight, do it for yourself. Show him and everyone else who you really are." When Clara stepped onto the stage, the room fell silent. The lights dimmed, and for a moment, the enormity of the moment threatened to overwhelm her. But then she spotted Elon in the front row, his expression steady and encouraging. The opening notes of her song began, and Clara took a deep breath. Her voice emerged, shaky at first, but then growing stronger with every word. She sang with all the emotion she'd been holding back for years: pain, hope, defiance. By the time she finished, the audience was on their feet, the applause thunderous. In the back of the room, Brian stood frozen, his smirk long gone. Clara met his gaze for the briefest of moments before turning away, a triumphant smile on her lips. This time, she wasn't running. She was standing tall. Backstage, Elon met her with a look of pride. "That," he said, "was extraordinary." Clara let out a breathless laugh, the weight of years lifting from her shoulders. For the first time, she said, "I actually believe that." The gala buzzed with energy as Clara stepped off the stage, her performance still echoing in the hearts of everyone present. Guests swarmed her with compliments, praising her voice and courage. Yet, amid the noise, she searched for one face, Elon's. She found him near the edge of the stage, standing apart from the crowd. His expression was calm, but his eyes reflected a rare vulnerability. As she approached, he extended a hand to steady her, sensing her exhaustion from the emotional performance. "You were incredible," Elon said, his voice steady but tinged with admiration. "The kind of incredible that people don't forget." Clara smiled, the heat of the stage lights still lingering on her skin. "I couldn't have done it without you." His response came with a faint smirk. "I think you've been able to do this all along. I just gave you a nudge." Before she could reply, a staff member ushered the crowd into the adjoining reception hall. Clara and Elon lingered behind in the quiet space, the noise fading into a distant hum. The theater, once filled with the weight of Clara's fear, now felt like a sanctuary. Elon reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, black velvet box. Clara froze as he opened it, revealing an elegant ring, a delicate design with a single diamond flanked by two tiny emeralds. The sight of it sent her heart racing. "Elon," she began, her voice barely a whisper. He knelt on one knee, his expression a mixture of determination and vulnerability. "Clara, when I started this, I thought I was taking on a challenge, something to prove to myself and the world that anything is possible. But along the way, I realized this was never about a challenge. It was about you, about how you've inspired me in ways I didn't know I needed." Clara's breath hitched, her hands covering her mouth as tears welled in her eyes. "You've shown me resilience, courage, and what it means to believe in something bigger than yourself," Elon continued. "I don't just admire you, Clara. I care about you deeply. You've changed my life as much as I've tried to change yours." The silence between them felt endless as he held her gaze. Finally, he asked, "Will you marry me?" Clara's emotions churned, a mix of shock, joy, and doubt. She took a shaky step back, shaking her head slightly, not in refusal, but in disbelief. "Elon, I don't know what to say." "Say yes," he replied, his voice soft but sure. Her mind raced. Was this real? Was it genuine? Or was it another grand gesture, a symbol of his vision rather than his heart? The weight of her past insecurities bore down on her, but so did the warmth of the person standing before her. "I need to think," she said, her voice trembling. "I need to be sure this is real, that I'm not just another impossible thing for you to conquer." Elon nodded, his expression softening with understanding. He rose to his feet and placed the ring back in the box, slipping it into his pocket. "Take all the time you need," he said. "But know this. This isn't about a challenge. It's about you. And I'm not going anywhere." Clara's tears fell freely as she nodded, unable to form words. She turned and walked away, her heart pounding with emotions she couldn't yet name. In the distance, the sound of laughter and music filled the air. But for Clara, the real question was what her heart truly wanted, and she wasn't ready to answer it yet. The days following Elon's proposal were a whirlwind of conflicting emotions for Clara. She spent hours replaying the moment in her mind. His words, his tone, the ring sparkling in the dim theater lights. Yet, alongside the warmth of his sincerity came the nagging whisper of doubt. Was this love, or was this just another part of the challenge? She sought refuge in routine, throwing herself into her music and training, but the weight of the unanswered question lingered. Every time she glanced at her phone and saw Elon's name, she hesitated to respond. What could she say? She wasn't ready to make a decision, and she wasn't sure she ever would be. One evening, Clara found herself in Dr. Torres' office, the familiar comfort of the space easing her tension. Dr. Torres listened intently as Clara recounted the proposal, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "I don't know what to do," Clara admitted, her voice wavering. It felt real. But what if it's not? What if I'm just another project for him? A way to prove to himself, or to the world, that he can fix anything? Dr. Torres leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. "Do you feel like a project?" Clara blinked, caught off guard by the question. "I don't know. Sometimes, I think he sees me as more than that. But then I remember how it all started. It wasn't about me. It was about proving something to everyone else. And now," Dr. Torres pressed gently. "What does it feel like now?" Clara's eyes filled with tears. "It feels different. He's been there for me in ways no one else ever has. But I'm scared to believe it. I've trusted the wrong people before, and it broke me." Dr. Torres nodded, her tone soothing. "It's natural to feel hesitant, Clara. Trust takes time, and the decision you make should come from a place of confidence, not fear. What do you need to feel certain?" Clara wiped her eyes, her voice soft. "I need to know that he loves me, not the person I've become or the story I represent. Just me." Later that night, Clara sat at her piano, the soft melody of an unfinished song filling her small apartment. The music helped her think, its rhythm steadying her racing mind. As her fingers moved over the keys, she thought about the moments with Elon that felt genuine. His quiet encouragement during her lowest points, the way he listened without judgment, the unwavering belief he had in her even when she doubted herself. Her phone buzzed, breaking her concentration. It was a message from Elon. "I know you need time, but if you want to talk, I'm here." No pressure. Clara stared at the screen, her heart aching. She typed out a reply, erasing it twice before finally sending. "I need to see you. Tomorrow." The response was almost immediate. "Of course. Name the time and place." The next day, Clara chose a quiet cafe away from the city's bustling crowds. She arrived early, nerves twisting her stomach into knots. When Elon walked in, his presence as calm and commanding as ever, she stood to greet him. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the unspoken tension heavy between them. "I wasn't sure you'd call," Elon said as he sat across from her. "I almost didn't," Clara admitted, her hands clasped tightly on the table. "But I need answers." "Anything," Elon replied, his voice steady. She took a deep breath, meeting his gaze. Why did you propose? And don't give me some grand speech about resilience or inspiration. I need to know why me. Why now? Elon leaned forward, his expression earnest. Because I see you, Clara. Not as a project, not as a challenge, but as someone who's changed my life. You've made me think differently, feel differently. You've shown me things about myself that I didn't know were there. That's why. Clara studied him, her heart pounding. And what if I say no? Will you move on to the next impossible things? Elon shook his head. If you say no, I'll respect it, but I won't stop being in your corner. This isn't about winning or losing for me. It's about you being happy, whatever that looks like. His words brought tears to her eyes, but this time they weren't from fear. They were from relief, from understanding. The first time, she felt the walls around her heart begin to crack. I need more time, she said softly. You have it, Elon replied without hesitation. As much as you need. As they left the cafe, Clara realized something had shifted. She still didn't have all the answers, but for the first time, she felt like she was moving toward clarity. And maybe, just maybe, towards something greater than she'd ever thought possible. The next few weeks brought a calm yet deliberate shift in the relationship between Clara and Elon. True to his word, he didn't push her for a decision or flood her life with grand gestures. Instead, he quietly supported her, showing up for her in ways that were deeply personal and unassuming. Clara's music began to take center stage in her life. Small performances turned into larger opportunities, and Elon, while never overbearing, was always there in the background, ensuring she had the resources to succeed. He attended every performance, sometimes slipping into the back of the room unnoticed, clapping the loudest when the applause came. One evening, Clara returned home after a particularly exhilarating performance at a small but packed venue. She found an envelope waiting on her doorstep with a simple note. You've been proving yourself to the world for months. Tomorrow, let me prove something to you. Be ready at 5 p.m. Dress comfortably. Curiosity and apprehension mingled as she stared at the note. Whatever Elon had planned, it felt different from his usual direct approach. She wondered what he could possibly have in mind. The next evening, Elon picked Clara up in a sleek but understated electric car. There were no photographers, no media, no attention-grabbing spectacle. Instead, he drove her to a quiet warehouse on the edge of the city, its exterior plain and unremarkable. What's this? Clara asked as they stepped out of the car. You'll see, Elon replied with a small smile, leading her inside. The warehouse was transformed. Soft lights illuminated the space, and in the center stood a grand piano. Around it were chairs arranged for what appeared to be a small, intimate gathering. Clara's brow furrowed in confusion. What is this? She asked again, her voice tinged with unease. I wanted to give you a stage that's entirely yours, Elon said. No judgment, no pressure. Just you, your music, and the people who believe in you. From the shadows, her team appeared. Ethan, Dr. Torres, and Dr. Monroe, along with a few others she had grown close to during her transformation. They all smiled warmly, offering silent encouragement. Clara's chest tightened. I don't know if I can do this. Elon stepped closer, his tone gentle but firm. You've performed for strangers. Now it's time to perform for the people who care about you. Before she could protest, he guided her to the piano. Clara sat down, her fingers trembling as they hovered over the keys. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and began to play. The first notes were hesitant, but as the melody unfolded, her confidence grew. She sang with a raw, heartfelt passion that filled the room, her voice weaving a story of resilience, heartbreak, and hope. When she finished, the room erupted in applause, the warmth of it washing over her like a wave. Elon stepped forward, his expression unreadable at first. Then, with a rare tenderness, he said, I knew you'd be incredible, but you've managed to surpass even that. Clara laughed through the tears welling in her eyes. Why are you doing all of this? Because I want you to see yourself the way I see you, Elon replied. Strong, brilliant, and capable of anything. The gesture, while simple, left a deep impression on Clara. Over the following days, she found herself reflecting on everything Elon had done, not just for her transformation, but for her heart. He had proven, not with words, but with actions, that his feelings for her were real. The next time Clara saw Elon, it wasn't to rehearse or train. It was to hand him a small velvet box. Inside was the ring he had offered her weeks ago. "Elon," she said, her voice steady, "ask me again." His face lit up with a mix of surprise and joy. "Are you sure?" Clara smiled, her eyes brimming with emotion. "I've never been more sure of anything." This time, when he knelt and asked her to marry him, Clara didn't hesitate. She said yes, and as they embraced, she felt not just the warmth of love, but the certainty that she had made the right choice. Not just about him, but about herself. For the first time in her life, Clara believed she was enough. The day of Clara and Elon's wedding was one of clear skies and gentle breezes. The ceremony, held at a quiet vineyard far from the prying eyes of the public, was intimate and deeply personal. Clara had insisted on simplicity, and Elon had wholeheartedly agreed. This day, they both felt, was about them and the people who had stood by them through their journeys. As Clara prepared in a charming, sunlit bridal suite, she gazed at her reflection in the mirror. Her dress was elegant but understated, a flowing ivory gown that hugged her figure in all the right places. For the first time, she saw herself not as the insecure woman she once was, but as someone worthy of love and happiness. A soft knock on the door broke her thoughts. Ethan peeked in, his usual playful grin replaced by a tender smile. "You ready, superstar?" Clara laughed, though her hands trembled. "I think so." Ethan stepped inside, his voice softening. "You've come a long way, Clara, and you deserve every bit of joy waiting out there." Her eyes misted as she nodded. "Thanks, Ethan, for everything." He gave her a quick hug before stepping out to join the others. Clara took one last look in the mirror, squared her shoulders, and headed for the vineyard's garden, where Elon waited. The ceremony was magical. Rows of chairs lined with white roses faced an arbor draped in greenery and soft fabrics. Elon stood at the end of the aisle, dressed in a classic black tuxedo, his expression a mix of awe and emotion as Clara appeared. When their eyes met, the world seemed to fall away. Clara felt her nervousness fade, replaced by a calm certainty. This was where she belonged. As she walked down the aisle, she saw familiar faces: Ethan, Dr. Torres, Dr. Monroe, and even some of her co-workers from the catering job where her story began. Everyone who had witnessed her journey was there, cheering her on with their smiles and tears. The vows were heartfelt and raw. Elon spoke of how Clara had inspired him to see the world and himself differently. Clara spoke of finding strength she never knew she had, strength she credited in part to him, but mostly to the belief he helped her cultivate in herself. "I never thought I could be someone who deserved love," Clara said, her voice trembling. "But you showed me that I always was. And I promise, for the rest of my life, to believe in myself as much as you believe in me." The applause and cheers that followed were punctuated by laughter when Clara whispered, "And I promise not to argue when you buy another rocket." The reception was filled with joy. Guests danced under strings of lights, enjoying a feast that blended Clara's favorite comfort foods with Elon's preference for elegant simplicity. A live jazz band played, and at one point, Clara took the stage, singing a song she had written for Elon, a soulful, heartfelt melody that left everyone, including her husband, in tears. The evening wasn't without its drama. Brian, Clara's ex-boyfriend, had somehow caught wind of the wedding and attempted to crash it. He was stopped at the gate by two no-nonsense security guards who promptly turned him away. "Tell her she'll never be anything without me," he shouted as he was escorted off the property. Ethan, watching from a distance, muttered, "Guess some people never change." But Clara never heard about it until much later. By then, it no longer mattered. She was surrounded by love and had long since left the shadows of her past behind. As the night drew to a close, Clara and Elon shared a quiet moment beneath the stars. She leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "Do you ever think about how this all started?" Clara asked, her voice thoughtful. "All the time," Elon replied. "It feels like another lifetime." Clara chuckled. "If someone had told me a year ago that I'd be here, married you, I'd have thought they were insane." Elon smiled, his hand intertwining with hers. "And if someone had told me that helping you would change my life more than anything else I've ever done, I wouldn't have believed them." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Clara spoke again. "You know, I think I'm finally ready." "For what?" Elon asked. "To start believing in the impossible," she said, her voice filled with quiet certainty. Elon kissed her forehead, a smile playing on his lips. "Good, because you've always been proof of it." Their story wasn't about perfection or fairy tales. It was about resilience, love, and the belief that even the most unlikely of beginnings could lead to something extraordinary. And as they sat under the stars, hand in hand, Clara felt a peace she had never known before. She was no longer just the woman who had changed. She was the woman who had found herself.